Welcome to GS Podcast number 54, a superb episode for you. I have on the podcast Dr. Christian Jessen. Some of you may have noticed I've been trying to get Christian on the podcast for a while, and when you listen to this, you'll understand why. Fantastic discussion, really enjoyed it, thoroughly nice chap as well. One of the main reasons I wanted to speak to him, he's got a huge body of work behind him now, debunking pseudo-scientific claims and various other quackery from subsets of his profession. So he's a staunch advocate of humanism as well, but a few years back he did this wonderful documentary called Undercover Doctor, Cure Me, I'm Gay. And I suppose that, a couple of years in TV years, that's probably a lot longer, so I wasn't really sure how much of it would still fresh in his mind or whether he'd be keen to talk about it, but just listening to him, he's clearly fresh in his head. He's really, really passionate about these things, and that you'll learn a lot from listening to it. The basic premise of the documentary was Christian, as a gay man, went around to sort of see some of these quote-unquote gay cures and put himself in the position of patient to see what they involved and what the motivations were. It was really compelling television. So we'll be speaking about that at length. Don't worry if you haven't seen the documentary, this podcast will work as a standalone anyway, all the relevant information's on it. We delve into many more topics as well, from religion to homeopathy to sports stars coming out, the closet. It was really interesting, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy listening to it. Like I always say, if you've enjoyed hearing from our guest on the show, send them some love on Twitter, let them know what you think, even some follow-up questions. You can find Dr. Christian at Dr. Christian. Surprise, surprise. Doctor's not the short form version, DOCTOR. You can keep up to date on the podcast at gspellchecker.com. Enjoy! It's a great pleasure to welcome to the GS podcast Dr. Christian. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, how are you?
It's a pleasure to be talking to you today, actually. I know you've been chasing me for a while, haven't you? But finally we've managed to organise something.
Yeah, where's the line between persistent and stalker, do you think?
It depends what you want and how much you want it, really.
Well, I'm very glad you're here anyway. I really wanted to talk to you about your Undercover Doctor documentary that you did, Cure Me, I'm Gay. I mean, I think it was, cast your mind back, I think it was 2013, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'll never forget it, to be honest.
For me, it was absolutely fantastic TV. I kind of laughed, I got angry, I nearly cried a little bit. I was wondering if maybe you could explain what the premise was for that documentary to people who may not have seen it.
Well, the idea was really that I'll start right at the beginning. When the idea first came to me, I was sitting in clinic, and a young chap came in to see me as a doctor in my clinic, and said, I know you're gay, I've seen you on telly, so I thought you'd be the best person to come to. I'm gay, and I want you to help me not to be gay. And I nearly fell off my chair, really, because I was not expecting that. I'd never been asked that as a request before, really. And it just instantly sparked loads of strange, conflicting emotions. I was slightly offended at this request, because the implication, I wanted to sort of say, well, what's wrong with being gay, and why are you asking me of all people? This is not very tactful. And then I thought, I can't help you, what do I do? And then so the sort of knee-jerk reaction from me as a gay man was, this can't be done, I'm sorry, But then the doctor and me thought, well, who am I to turn this person away? If he wants to be not gay, it's not for me to really make that decision, I thought at the time. And it just, all these different things I thought was a fascinating subject. And as I looked into it, I realized that this was going on a lot. And I knew the history of sort of Alan Turing and reparatives and conversion therapies generally, but I hadn't realized it was still very, very, very prevalent, but driven underground. And something I quickly realized was that if I don't try and reach out and help this young man, he's going to end up going somewhere else. I arrogantly assume slightly less reputable, of course, as all doctors are extremely arrogant. but I thought, God, where is he going to end up, and what's he going to end up doing? And I was pretty certain that whatever it was not actually in his best interest or going to help him. So really, that was the start of this then extraordinary journey where I went off. And rather tongue-in-cheekly, I will be honest with you, exploring these different cures. I noticed there was one TV critic, actually, who he really annoyed me. There's a surprise, a TV critic annoyed me, but he said, oh, well, this whole documentary was biased from the start because Dr. Jessen didn't go into it with an open mind. And you unfortunately don't really get to respond to your critics. But, I wanted to say, well, I would have looked bloody stupid had I gone to it with an open mind, thinking I could in the first place, and not really a very good, sound scientific doctor. So, yes, I didn't go into it with an open mind. I went into it with an incredulous mind, and I left it with an even more incredulous mind.
Yeah, I think Carl Sagan said, didn't he, if you open your mind too much, your brain will fall out.
Quite.
Yeah, so, I mean, there was all these different therapies that you trialed and tested yourself. I think you mentioned aversion therapy there. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about how these therapies worked or didn't work, was the case, and what was the difference between them?
They're all based on a variety of different philosophies, and we can talk about the sort of more sinister undercurrent of what I think is actually going on a little bit later. But, in essence, I mean, the earliest one was aversion therapy, which, I mean, these days, if you did that on anybody, let's be slightly blunt, if you did it on anyone other than a gay man, it would be, or a woman, it would be considered torture.
It's like some hyper mental nightmare Pavlovian.
It's sort of Clockwork Orange, freaky. And I decided, I said, I'll be honest, the TV producers, a fantastic team that I work with, really, we bonded. I mean, for me, it was a really hard emotional journey. It was pretty horrible at times, and I was pretty emotionally raw and ragged, and they were just a wonderful team, straight actually, completely heterosexual, who just could not believe. And I worked with a wonderful guy who was the sort of cameraman and assistant director and things, who just, and he was straight, and he said, my God, I've never really thought about this idea of growing up and having to sort of justify to yourself who you are, as well as your parents, and it's really weird, and it was great to see someone actually for the first time thinking about these things. But I've gone a bit off track. But so I didn't really want to do aversion therapy because I was pretty sure that it didn't really happen anymore. I'm now pretty sure that I'm wrong, and it probably does. Oh, wow. A forced form of aversion therapy, but particularly in countries like Russia, unfortunately. But, so they said, look, I think it's important that people see, because it forms the basis of all the therapies, and that's really a basis of shame. So what I did, very memorably, really, was undertake it exactly as it would have been done. It was filmed in a very scary, formal setting. I met the chap who would undertake it. I was put into a room, no small talk, no chat, very serious. I was in a sort of hospital gown, and I drank a solution that actually was ipecacuanha, which is an emetic, makes you vomit violently. And as I sat waiting for the ipecac to work, I was shown pornographic images, gay pornographic images, and a tape was played on a loop over and over again, basically saying, your thoughts are unnatural and disgusting, you're shameful, you've let your parents down, you have no place in society, you are worthless, you are worse than worthless, over and over again. And I started to vomit, and there's no loo, and there's no sink. Now, actually, when they really did aversion therapy, they used to use an apomorphine injection. Now, that doesn't just make you vomit, it also makes you come out the other end as well, quite violently. And so it gives you terrible diarrhea, and you don't have a loo, and you don't have a sink, so you have to basically go where you are. And this might last for 24, 72 hours of you sitting in your own filth, so utterly knocked down to your most vulnerable, lowest possible, you are worthless. You feel it. You're sitting there in your own filth and vomit, looking at these pornographic images, smelling your own feces and your own vomit, hearing this tape telling you you're worthless. And the idea essentially is that next time you have a homosexual thought or are in a homosexual situation, that this will come flooding back and will sort of spoil the moment for you. It's horrific. I mean, it's torture. I don't think they'll do anything at all for that at Guantanamo, quite frankly. But there you go. And there I was, there on telly, vomiting away, and actually floods of tears and crying and feeling really very, very upset about it.
Yeah, I could see that, how much it was affecting you. I mean, if it makes you feel any better, it was uncomfortable to watch as well.
Do you know, the one good thing about that day, actually, and I say good thing, and it was done, all my crew were hidden, so the room was rigged with cameras. I saw no one other than the chap who initiated the therapy, who did it, the chap in the white coat. So I never saw my crew until we ended the filming. And I came out of that room. Well, actually, they came in to see me with the camera to interview me, and I was just in floods of tears. And I looked at my crew. It was just two guys, a director and the cameraman, and I could see they had tears streaming down their face. And they said afterwards, when the filming was finished, they said that was unbearable to watch because we couldn't go in and help you. And we'd all become very friendly at that point. So they were watching me on little cameras, kind of Big Brother style, and not able to go and help me. And I was crying my eyes out. I was having a horrible time. And it was incredibly reassuring and affirming that they were also kind of as distressed as I was. I felt kind of better about that in a way.
I mean, reading about these things on paper is one thing, but like being there in the room while it's happening, it must be horrifying, and especially for yourself to experience. But one of the things that really shocked me to hear as well, if I'm not mistaken, is that this kind of treatment was available on the NHS as late as 1980. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct, I'm afraid. And I think I said this line in the documentary, people like me would prescribe this treatment to people like me. That was... I wasn't just crying because I was humiliated and vomiting. I was crying for that reason. I was crying for all the people that were so miserable in their lives that they would willingly put themselves through this in a desperate search for any way out, that they could find. Homosexuality, remember, was illegal. It was classified in the DSM-4 and by the WHO as a mental disorder. Your life could be destroyed if you were outed as being gay. So you have to understand that it was no wonder people were, if someone was promising you, I can sort that out for you, I can stop these feelings, you would do anything. And I think what was so horrific, and the reason why we thought it very important actually to recreate this, is because in some countries things have moved on, but in other countries things are moving backwards. And in places like Russia and Uganda, and when you see gay men being hurled off buildings by, ISIS, Islamic State people, it's just horrific. And you think, well, maybe they'll start looking for this way out again. And I think people needed to see that it's just not an effective way of doing things.
I agree. I mean, as a side note, what do you think about... I mean, I have mixed feelings on this, but when I hear about a sporting event we've got a World Cup coming up in Qatar, and there's already been literature circulated about, I think even men and women aren't allowed to hold hands, but certainly not men and men and things like that. And I'm thinking, does sport have a responsibility to say, well, we have a set of ethics, and if your culture is not to them ethics, we can't hold the event there? Or do you think it's a case of try and take the event there and change minds?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, because I can't resolve it in my head. One part of me says actually we shouldn't be going to countries with appalling human rights, histories and things like this that are still going on. We really should be boycotting. But another part of me says actually by going, and you saw some wonderful things at the Olympics in Russia, when people would just hold up rainbow flags and hold hands and kiss each other very, very publicly. It was impossible for the authorities to intervene, wasn't it? And so there was a chance to make it. You know what? It's a very similar thing to this whole debate that's raging about no platforming, and Peter Tatchell and people like that were absolutely jumped on for signing a form saying we shouldn't be no platforming people, however vile their views. If you no platform them, there is never a chance to take them down and to show them up for the bigots that they are. So give them a soapbox to stand on, let them enter debates, and we can prove them wrong, and I think there is a lot to be said for that. I didn't understand the sort of violence against him as a result of him saying that. It was common sense, and I think that applies similarly, that maybe by going to these countries and going, actually, this may be your laws, but it's not our laws, and we will not abide by them, you can really make a stand. It takes a brave person to do that, but there are, thankfully, a lot of brave people around prepared to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in a way by boycotting, you're kind of punishing the people rather than the regime, aren't you, in a way?
You're punishing the people there, and all this stuff when Russia came out and all the gay bars stopped serving Russian vodka, and it was all very noble and good, but it didn't really change anything in Russia. But going to the Olympics and large, gay organizations and gay athletes who really took us down and put a large middle finger up at the system in Russia, actually I think probably had a lot more effect than any sort of boycott ever would have done.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree with you on that one. I mean, I wanted to ask you as well. I mean, after the aversion therapy, you spoke to somebody who would have been like you, who was a doctor who administered this treatment, and you asked him, what does he feel having done this now? And it was sort of the Nuremberg defence. I mean, it's hard to judge, but I mean, what did you feel when he just said, well, it was my job, I just did what I was told?
Do you know what? I understood. I was in such... I have to say, and again, this probably will sound a bit odd, but the chap that did the whole thing, the chap in the white coat, the white-haired chap, he was incredible because he used to do these therapies, and he acknowledges very openly that this was utterly wrong and utterly ineffective, and he's very remorseful. And he agreed to actually sort of put himself, I think, probably in quite a vulnerable situation potentially by saying that openly and agreeing to recreate this therapy. So he did a very important thing for us, actually. And so I will kind of defend him to the last, even though he put me through hell. Because, he's doing the best he can to make sure that people understand what it was and that it never happens again. And I think... and I get that medicine is a hideously conservative, a traditional practice, and you see people today, we're still banging on debating about how whistleblowers should be treated, for goodness sake. Like, that should even be an issue. So still, even today, coming forward and saying, I think my colleague is utterly unsuitable for what he's doing and dangerous, is a big deal. So, I think for him to make a stand as a young trainee nurse was impossible. I think it stands up as a defense, actually. But I think what he's doing now is trying to atone for it, and I think that's a very big thing of him to do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's acknowledgement there, isn't there? And like you say, very helpful, just his involvement. I mean, perhaps I should have picked up or mentioned the gay test, which
yes.
you scored very highly on. Congratulations.
I'm super gay, apparently.
Yes. So, I mean, what does that involve? I mean, I suppose in a way, with it being so observable as someone being gay, it should really blow this choice narrative out of the water, shouldn't it?
That's a debate that's still raging, this nature or nurture. And the studies are just, I think, overwhelming in their evidence. The problem is, I mean, for me, the great things are the twin studies. But, both the gays are gay, you're born gay, and the gay as a choice brigades both quote the twin studies to suit their own needs. And it just has a greater significance to me that actually if you cherry pick your results, you can sort of prove anything. But so in a nutshell, the twin studies showed that if you look at identical twins, 52% of them turn out both to be gay, all right? When you look at fraternal twins, not identical twins, only 22%. And when you look at adopted twins, so two, non-relatives brought together, living together as twins, only about 11% turn out to be gay, which is about consistent with the general population. And that, to me, is a very, very powerful argument for the genetics of sexual orientation. But, of course, what the people who disagree with that says, but it's only 52%. But, as we well know now with genetics, there's genes and there's epigenetics and all sorts of different factors come into play to affect how your genes are expressed. So I don't think that's a valid argument at all. But it's the subject is fascinating, but I think we're well into the idea that it is not a choice, and that kind of leads quite nicely into some of these other therapies like reparative therapy, which is the big one still going on. And in fact, tonight I've got to go on Newsnight to talk about this, opposite a chap called Joseph Nicolosi, who rather ironically refused to let me interview him to make this documentary, which I'm going to remind him of tonight. So he is known as the father of reparative therapies. What a terrible title to hold, but there we go. So he invented this idea, and really the idea behind that is that you're gay, you have homosexual tendencies, or you have same-sex attraction disorder, as they call it, very sort of notably and pointedly, because of childhood trauma, because of lack of bonding with your father figure, etc., possibly even abuse. And there's a very memorable moment in the documentary. I remember when I went round to my father's house, my parents' house, and stormed in and said, "Now look here, I've been told in America that you must have abused me, and that's why I'm gay. What do you think about that?" And he was just wonderful in his answer, But, that whole sort of complete illogical fallacy has formed the basis of an entire therapy. But because it's dressed up in science and psychologists do it, and suddenly, instead of involving electric shocks, it involves deep psychoanalysis looking at trauma and repair, suddenly it becomes more acceptable and more legitimate. Actually, I'd say it's the same old bigotry, just dressed up in pseudoscience.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned before, the young guy that comes to you into your surgery, I mean, you've got a society that's kind of reinforcing this idea that there's something not right, he's unwell, he's got a disease. So naturally, if you've been convinced you're unwell, you're going to try and seek out treatment, aren't you? And then you have these woo-woo peddlers who are dressing it up in this pseudo-scientific language, and you're already in a state of desperation. You're going to gravitate towards them anyway, aren't you?
It's no surprise. And when you look at the background, when I talked to this young patient that we started off this whole conversation with, the chap who came to see me in clinic, he is Iranian by birth, his mother is Iranian, and, he comes out with a shocking statement that his mother actually thinks that he should be hung, publicly hung, or rather hanged, to use the correct English term. He should be publicly hanged because he's gay. His mother has utterly rejected him, in fact thinks that he should be executed. So no wonder this kid is lost, confused, upset, and looking for anything that he can do to make things right and please his mother and find his mother's love again. It's horrific, and, the sinister undercurrent of what is behind all of these therapies, all of them, without exception, is religion. And it's religious bias, and it's always religiously motivated. There is not a single truly secular organization that promotes gay therapies and gay cures. And I think that is, very, very telling.
Yeah, I mean, you said at the end of the documentary that religion is having far too much of a say in these things. And I wanted to touch on that. I mean, religion is the main driver. I mean, I personally feel it's one of the things that's keeping homophobia from dying. I think we'll always have bigotry, but I think as long as it's mandated by the so-called word of God, we're going to struggle. I think there was just a Gallup survey released recently, which, like we needed it, but there was some data shown that collected between 2011 and 2014 that there's a strong correlation between homophobia and church attendance. Are you surprised there? Is that?
Yeah. Did that surprise anybody at all?
No. But I mean, one of the things you shown on that documentary, which was probably one of the most disappointing things for me, is that I kind of hoped that some of these prejudiced ideas would probably die with older generations. But I mean, when you went and spoke to a lot of younger evangelicals, they held the same views, didn't they?
Yeah, and you saw my reaction. That was the first time I'd ever sworn on telly, and my mother was quite shocked, but she did say afterwards that she had to admit it was justified, actually. I did a very Gordon Ramsay-style expletive. It was a moment where I was so full of hope, and I was like, let's go to a church, but I still, we can't just sort of religion bash here, because of course you can be Christian and gay and happy, and there must be religious people who do actually listen to the basic message of Christianity, of brotherly love, etc., etc. And I thought maybe it's the young people who are more exposed to, I would never have told my own grandparents who are now dead, I would never have told them I was gay, and that didn't matter. That wasn't because they were bigoted. it was a different time, a different world. Things weren't so visual, and it would have been difficult for them to understand. But, a young person, my God, there's gay characters in every sitcom and film that you watch, and you know what I mean? And they present chat shows on telly, and you'd have thought, for God's sake, it's hardly a sort of a big deal. And yet there I was in that car park of that massive evangelical church talking to young people who were telling me it's been caused by demons, and they need exorcism and treatment. And I kind of lost it, because I'd really built my hopes up that we were in for a good bit finally, a bit of hope and a bit of light and a bit of positivity. But no.
I mean, to be fair, I was going to note how remarkably objective you stayed in the face of these people. It was only in your quiet moments you kind of gave a bit of an emotional response. I mean, you're being told that there's something sinister or there's some trauma in your past just because of your mere nature. I mean, did you struggle to keep your cool with these people?
I did. And you know what? That was a really interesting debate that we had during the filming. I was very conscious that I wasn't coming, I wasn't sort of attacking and criticizing and questioning people in an aggressive way. But the problem is when you do that, they tend to shut down. And it's very much my philosophy, and this goes exactly back to that no platforming idea that I was talking about, that actually give them enough rope and they'll hang themselves. Just let them talk, And the reason those kids, that was not their fault. They had been indoctrinated in this rubbish. They were taught this as they sat in that church. They were absorbing this nonsense, and I don't think you can quite blame them for that. I don't think they were quite at an age where they would start truly questioning things. I don't think they'll ever start truly questioning things, but I think, if you do come on very strong, sometimes I had to fib. I had to fib about who I was and what I was doing, because then they truly opened up. They're so Nicolosi, for instance, the reparative therapist, they're very, very media savvy. They've been stung a lot before, and so they're really on the ball. And when they know it's a sort of formal interview setting, they will behave themselves absolutely. But if you allow them to forget, if you just let that slip, out then comes these little statements that hint at something more sinister underground. So I interviewed a chap called Davidson, Mike Davidson, I think his name is, and he's a chap over here that wants to make reparative therapies legal to do to teenagers. And he's the chap who he put those adverts on the buses in London that said, some people are ex-gay, get over it or something, in response to Stonewall, and Boris Johnson, the mayor, banned them. And there's a lawsuit going on at the moment. But when you talk to him and you really push him, and you ask him, why are you doing this? Out comes the statement, well, because being gay is just wrong. It says so in the Bible. So then I jumped on him and I said, but you're a scientist, right? And he goes, absolutely, everything I do is scientifically based. I say, so answer me this question, evolution or creation? And he writhed and he squirmed. And I said, come on, it's a really simple question. You're a scientist, evolution or creation? And he wouldn't answer it. And in fact, because we had so little time in that documentary and so much footage, it never made the final cut, which I was a bit disappointed with, because it sort of underlies these flaws that they cherry pick. You just cherry pick the bits that suit you and your agenda, and everything else is conveniently, let slip. So yeah, I'm a scientist, but I also believe in the Bible, and so yes, that's a very awkward question. I can't answer. I mean, it's just utter nonsense, isn't it?
Yeah, I completely. I mean, I hear it all the time. That people will say, "Well, I only believe in the New Testament." The word of Jesus. So you say, well, fair enough, then we can drop all this homosexuality is an abomination from the Old Testament, and they won't sign off on that. So they do pick and choose. But I have got the banned ads on my list of things to ask, actually, because I wanted to get your opinion on something like that. I mean, do you think it is right to outright ban them? We know it's wrong, we know it's stupid, but in terms of advertising standards, is there any breaches there, do you think?
It's a really tricky. Well, I think the flaw is in the promise that you can change someone's sexual orientation. And the reason we went off to beautiful Ithaca in New York and to Cornell University, which was an absolute, golly, I'd love to do a sabbatical there. It was the most beautiful place. And I did that test of sexual orientation, which was essentially kind of watching porn and having but it wasn't having, so there was a penile gauge that measured penile response, but, when you're sitting in a room very, very aware that your mum's going to watch this and there's a camera crew outside, it's very unlikely to register any sort of a penile response, probably, because you're sitting there going, don't get an erection, don't get an erection, don't get an erection. But what was so telling about this is your pupil, when you saw something that you were attracted to, your pupils dilated, and you cannot fake that. And interestingly enough, even though I was sitting there in this little booth watching porn going, don't get an erection, don't get an erection, I still actually got fluctuations on my penile gauge that you could see on the screen, which they kept cutting to, of course, because that was the funny bit, And the chap who runs the test, said this wonderful line. He goes, your genitals don't lie. You can't fake a genital response as a man. It's almost impossible, even if it's the slightest flicker, it's tied deeply into sort of subconscious systems of attraction and arousal, which we are all basic creatures. This is what we're driven to do, and you can't fake it. And I think the extension to that was when I went and I met all those supposedly ex-gay people campaigning for rights out in Washington, and it was the most pitifully pathetic little display of very, very uncomfortable, uncertain people that you'd ever seen. And I said, guys, come on, come with me. There's so little science behind this. This is your opportunity to really do some good come and show us how ex-gay you are. Let's do this test together. And none of them came. They all declined, every single one without exception. And I just thought that was really the most conclusive proof of it all, really.
That was very telling, yeah. I mean, what do you feel personally about vocal, self-declared ex-gays? What sort of psychology is at play there, do you think?
I just think it's deeply... Well, that's a massive question, because, there's so many different things. I think there's an underlying homophobia, and we had a chap who was going, and he said very memorably, because gay is not good, gay is not, happy, gay is sad, and he clearly had these massive issues, and they're standing there trying, the expression I used really, I think, was they were all standing there trying so hard. Their life, everything was, they were trying to get it right. They would not be themselves at any cost. And I found that the most tragic, sad thing I'd ever seen, actually, that people could be so uncomfortable in their own skins. What should therapy be all about? These people should be in therapy being helped to be comfortable with who they are, not in therapy being sort of artificially forced into a being that they think they should be. That's not the premise of therapy at all. That's quite the opposite of what therapy should do. And I think these were very, very malaligned and actually mistreated people somewhere along the way.
Yeah, it's tragic, isn't it, really? It's hard to be angry at them, in a sense.
Oh, I couldn't be. And my director kept pushing me, goes, aren't you angry? Aren't you angry? Say something, And I was like, actually, I'm not. I'm really, really sad. I'm really sad. I can't be angry at these people. Because, a lot of them, so one of this idea behind reparative therapy and that homosexuality is caused by childhood abuse and trauma, well, a lot of those ex-gay people had the most horrendous stories of childhood abuse and trauma, which sort of, for them, cemented and made evident the basis of reparative therapy for them. But what was so sad is these people should have been in therapy for their trauma and their abuse, but it was sort of a sidestepping and blaming it on something else. Let's focus on the homosexuality and not on the hideousness of whatever went on when they were kids. It was such a mistreatment. I think it was negligent.
At what age did you become aware of this religious objection to homosexuality? And is there anything have you ever faced any of yourself? I think, when you grow up gay, you're always aware that you're different and that many, many people consider it wrong. And I think it's hard to put into words, but a classic example, and Stonewall is sort of doing a campaign at the moment to try and stop kids using the word gay for bad. Oh, that's so gay, that's totally gay, that is, meaning it's really bad. And sort of rightly so, because, when I was a kid, that was what we said, even I said, and we used to tease each other for being gay, and we didn't really know what that meant, we just knew it was a bad thing. So that was deeply ingrained, even in our childhoods, and when you finally work out what being gay is, and then you finally work out that that's what you are too, there's this hideous, oh my God, no. And I can remember this
sense of sort of, God, I really don't want to be like this. I'm lonely. I remember feeling lonely at school because my friends were kind of getting girlfriends and becoming interested in girls and going off and spending time with the girls. And I remember not wanting to do that. I wasn't really lusting after boys, don't get me wrong, but I knew that I didn't really want to be going off with the girls. And so I kind of felt, well, what do I do? Suddenly everyone's gone and I'm sort of left behind and I feel left out. And I just remember thinking, I really don't want this. And that, I have two very, very educated, very, very liberal parents. So there was no pressure there at all about what my sexual orientation should or shouldn't be. And the same with my school, the teachers and things. But it's that just general societal sort of sniggering in the background about being gay that makes you very aware that something's not quite right with it. And you never see any gay sort of imagery. You grow up with a mother and a father, and everything is to do with mums and dads, and all the teaching as you learn about sex education is all mums and dads. Clause, Section 28 was still very much in existence, and so there was no teaching of any other possible way. So it was very much not the norm how I was, and that's a very, very different. I think you have to be sort of supremely confident in order to battle through that and come out the other side and go, no, I'm absolutely fine with that, despite what anyone thinks. That's a really hard thing to do.
I suppose it creates resilience in a way.
Well, yeah, I think it creates bloody-mindedness, but I think sometimes it creates, real. There's a reason why there's an increase in mental health issues and depression and suicide and drug taking and risky behaviour in gay men. You can't deny that doesn't exist. It absolutely does, but I think it's very clear why that exists. And I think it's very much the pressures of society and their views, and those are moral views, and those moral views, however religious or not religious people are, those morals have come at some point from religion. Yeah,
talking about not having anything, you look outwards and you see families and it's the typical mum-father archetype and things like that. I had there's a lady that I've had on the podcast a few times. She's called Aina. She's an ex-Muslim and she's a Canadian Pakistani blogger. And she's released a really good children's book in Pakistan and other areas. It's called My Chacha is Gay. I don't know if you've heard of it. I'll have to forward you some information. But Chacha means uncle. And the story is just about a typical gay relationship. It's set in similar as any other book about mummy and daddy, but it's two gay men instead.
Right.
She's had a really big response to this. Some of it not great, a lot of death threats and things like that, but a lot of acceptance and celebration of it as well. So I think the more we can, I think popular culture may be where some of this battle lies.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think it's really important that people like me make documentaries like the one I made. Obviously I would say that, wouldn't I? But yeah, I mean, I know that sounds a ridiculously obvious thing to say, but it is. And you remember, honestly, when Tom Daly, the diver, came out as gay in that little video, that was quite apparent that if he hadn't done it, a newspaper was going to out him. That was the horrible thing behind that was never said, but it was very, very obvious that his hand had been forced. But it was front page news on virtually worldwide. And you think, we really, why is someone's sexual orientation, and a kid at that, let's face it, that's all he is, why is it front page news? What sort of madness is this? But somehow maybe that was a very good thing, I think. It was very hard to be too negative about Tom Daly, and everyone kind of liked him, and most of us already knew his sexual orientation. But there were lots of mums and dads and, people all around the world who thought he was jolly fantastic and suddenly found out he was gay. But it was kind of too late to then decide that you don't like him, really, because you looked a bit superficial then. So, I think it's really important that there are openly public figures who do come out as gay, as I think it's important for celebrities to talk about their conditions, or having HIV, or having MS, or whatever it might be, mental health problems, anything associated with a lot of stigma. I think the more people in the public eye who come forward and talk about it, the more things are to change in the future, the more likely things are to change.
You touch on a good point there with Tom Daly. Like you say, more openly gay people, and someone like Tommy who's a role model as well is always helpful. But I mean, how do you feel about this focus on football and how few people identify as gay within that? I mean, I'm a football fan myself, and I mean, I don't know whether it's a case of maybe they're too scared to come out, or maybe they just want to keep it private, or maybe young people just feel that football has this culture that might not be welcoming to someone who's gay and won't even try and pursue an athletic career. What do you think? What do you think accounts for this?
I think it's not a question of not pursuing the career. I think it's just a question of not revealing your sexual orientation, if it's anything other than heterosexual. I think hasn't there been a documentary called "Why Are There No Gay Footballers?" And it was looking at exactly that. And of course, there are gay footballers. They just choose to keep it to themselves. Now, do you know what? So they should be able to keep it to themselves. Whose business is it? What is this world that we live in where your sexual orientation is such an important issue? And what is this world where people have to come out? No one goes, "Mum, Dad, I'm straight. I'm really sorry. I'm going to marry a girl." It's ludicrous. And I know that's not a new concept, but it's a great one because you realise how ridiculous it is. And this idea of having to go, "Mum, Dad, sit down. I've got something to tell you. I'm gay." Why? But this idea that footballers should be talking about their sexual orientation, well, of course, that goes back to the idea that the popular figures, role models, it would be of massive help, but they don't have to. And I think, unfortunately, gay is still very much used as a derogatory term, and I think football isn't. How can we describe football supporters politely?
Not welcoming, perhaps.
That's a very yes. Yeah. They're not always that welcoming, and I think when it comes to the excitement of a match and the blood's up and boiling, you do kind of want to hurl insults at the rival team, don't you? But unfortunately, still, being gay is a very easy target for insults, isn't it? And out they'll come, and that, who wants that? Who wants a stadium of people chanting faggot at you or whatever it is that they're going to chant? It's even however illegal it is.
What rhymes with faggot? It'd be a difficult chant.
Yes, that word doesn't rhyme with anything, does it? But
I mean, it's a great point because we're still having discussions and exposés about racist chants. So what chance have gay players got, really?
We do still have a long way to go. And I mean, my God, just when you think we're getting somewhere and I'm feeling good and I've made a documentary about something and I've talked about being gay and no one really cares and it's a big really... I mean, it was a tricky one for me because... I'm a doctor and I work in sexual health medicine. That involves looking at genitalia, and I was always acutely aware of, perhaps disclosing my sexual orientation when I'm on telly looking at rugby players' willies was going to be used against me in a very unpleasant way. It has always played on my mind. I can't not acknowledge that, and it's very obvious, isn't it? And so I did not want to be labelled the gay doctor. I don't mind being the doctor who also happens to be gay, but the gay doctor is a sort of hideous phrasing, and my sexual orientation has nothing to do with my job, and nor should it really. But, I was really worried about that for a long, long time. I can't remember where I was going with this now. What was the question?
Just about how it's we've got a long way to go. I mean, my next question was going to be, how far do you think Britain has come in terms of its attitudes to LGBT issues? That's where we were going with this. Yeah, so I didn't want to be labelled the gay doctor at all, but you think things are going on, and now I am doing stuff for Stonewall, and there's the leader of the opposition wearing "This is what a feminist looks like" T-shirt, and then you've got some people are getting over it on all the buses, and you think, wow, this is all right. And you've got Graham Norton and Alan Carr and people like that with the big Saturday night entertainment shows, and this is all good. And then Russia comes along, and Uganda comes along, and hideous images, and you just feel like you're spiraling backwards again, And I know that's the rest of the world, but we don't really live in separate countries anymore, do we? We're a global country, and it matters. I feel very strongly when people like me are being hideously abused in Uganda and execute the gays bill. I mean, just appalling nonsense. I don't have the words for it, actually. I'm very rarely lost for words, but I kind of am when it comes to this. You can't help but think, God, these poor teenage kids, I didn't have any of that when I was growing up gay, and I found it hard enough. Now, that was probably... It wasn't just my own issues and that I couldn't resolve it. Not at all. I was more confident than most. But can you imagine being a kid going through all that trauma of working out you're gay and who you are, and reading in the news about ISIS pushing gay men off buildings and burning tyres being put around
gay men and murdered in the streets, and Russia rounding up, I mean, my God, is that going to help you come out? It's just horrific. It really is.
Yeah, it's disappointing to see how little outrage there is about things that are happening elsewhere. I think people can get too caught up in their own little world and not really look outwards.
In a way, there's too much going on.
Yeah, that's true.
Should we worry about HIV? Should we worry, as Farage wrongly stated, about health tourism on the NHS? Should we worry about cancer? What about Big Pharma? What about this? There's all, there are too many causes, all of them good and noble and worthy of our attention, but who's got the time? And, if it's not quite specific to you, I'm not really that interested. I've got a job to do and a mortgage to pay, and, So, I mean, it's a really tricky one. I did a very interesting thing for PricewaterhouseCoopers, the company, on disclosure. I went to talk to our employees about whether, should one disclose one's sexual orientation or the fact that one has a disability, and what are the advantages, and and I remember saying, I got into a bit of a sort of spat with a member of the audience, because I said, look, I think it is our responsibility. If people don't understand your disability, if people don't understand being gay, I think we have a duty to help them to understand. And she stood up and she said, with respect, Dr. Christian, I think that's nonsense. We don't have a responsibility. Other people have a responsibility to understand us. And I think that's a very naive view. I think we do have work to do ourselves. And there wouldn't be LGBT organizations and LGBT branches in big companies trying to spread equality if that was the case, if it was other people's responsibility. It's not, it is our responsibility. When we have pride, that is saying, here we all are, we're not going away, you might as well learn to live with us, except, isn't it? And so I do think we have work to do, all over the world, and I think we should be making a noise.
That's a good positive message. Talking about something not so positive, moving back to quacks a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, do you think deep down they know they're hucksters, or do you think they're sincere, or can it be a mix of both?
Is this the gay therapist or just any old quacks doing any old thing?
Well, let's touch on the gay therapist, the ones that you encountered.
I think if you tell yourself an untruth enough times, you start to believe in your own nonsense. And remember, these people, I think that was one thing I really noticed, that I had no doubt that these people were still gay, even though they said they were ex-gay and they were now happy and heterosexual. I had absolutely no doubt they were still gay deep down. You can see it. If you call it a gaydar, if you like, you can sort of see it in their eyes. That's probably a terribly homophobic thing to say, I don't know, but hey, I can just tell. But they were so convinced. As I said, I use that phrase, they were trying so hard that, they sort of utterly believed this new character that they had created for themselves. It was like an actor. It was like a method actor, is the best way I can describe it. It was a lifetime of method acting, living the part. I think Daniel Day-Lewis does it. I think quite bizarrely, he utterly lives the character he's playing, and he even writes people letters in character. It's quite odd, apparently, to witness it, but he gives a very good performance as a result of it. And I think these therapists do just that. They've lived that part, that their belief is sincere. But what I think is most frightening is this sort of blinkered denial of the evidence that's pointing in completely the opposite direction, and it's that just refusal to accept that. But then, look at religion. How many religious people are there in the world? And that is I've just been fighting with someone on Twitter who's been saying it's not blind belief. And I said, but it can't be anything else. There is no evidence, so it can only be a blind belief, And I think that's kind of the case with therapies. You can easily parallel religion and a lot of quack therapies, can't you?
Yes. I think a lot of people, I certainly was surprised to discover that, exorcisms of gay demons were taking place in somewhere like East London, which got me thinking, how does it work in terms of legislation? Is it not regulated particularly well? Is it quite lax? How are these people not stopped from peddling their wares?
The church isn't legislated for or against in any great way, is it? You can teach people anything if it's a belief, and that is an issue that I don't know what the answers are. Again, it's fascinating. So, a pastor, a preacher, a vicar, whatever you want to call them, can say someone's got demons in them and absolutely terrify the poor person in front of a congregation of people. And it was the most frightening thing I've witnessed in a long time. I have to say, I was thoroughly disturbed. and but I don't think there's any law about that. But I think what I then went and talked to that pastor about at the end of that exorcism was, don't you think some of these people might be very, very disturbed, mentally ill? And are you sure that you are trained enough to be able to recognize that and help them? Because I suspect a lot of these people have deep-seated psychological problems, and you're just sort of blaming it on demons and exorcising them isn't perhaps the best care that they could be receiving, And he sort of didn't really have an answer for that, really. But it is frightening, isn't it? I couldn't believe it that it was still going on. I really couldn't. And it was very easy for us to film. That was the other rather bizarre thing, because that makes you think there's such a strong sense that this is fine. A lot of things are hard to film, like drug deals and, crystal meth labs, because everyone knows they are utterly not allowed and everything has to... But the fact that they were so happy for us to come in and film this, and he was exorcising gay demons, shows the sort of fervour and the belief with which they go about their work. And I think that means we have a hell of a job in front of us to try and convince them otherwise.
Absolutely. I mean, so you have these things like exorcisms that get, I suppose, a free pass under the guise of religious freedom, but then you have something like homeopathy, which is a recognised medical treatment. How does that stay so ingrained in our health service, given the fact we know it's bunk?
It's appalling. I mean, it's embarrassing, quite frankly. And I am embarrassed for health professionals, who continue to advocate it in the face of irrefutable evidence, I think we can safely say now. Yeah. But then I remember I said something in an interview which upset a lot of people. Hey, when do I not upset a lot of people? But I said I can't really take any healthcare professional or scientist seriously who's also deeply religious. And I don't think I'm the first person to say that, actually, but I rather mean it, because it's that blinkered, convenient ignoring of what we know to fit in with their religious beliefs that I find really frightening. We're living in a time where drug companies clearly haven't been very good about their trials. Things have been hidden and suppressed, and results have clearly been tweaked, and we are trying to improve that and introduce openness and show all results gathered, and that's very important. But you can clearly see that doesn't fit in with sort of a religious philosophy that might be behind whatever these things are looking into, you see? And that makes me really concerned, but it's this sort of idea that because it's a religion, one can't really touch it, criticize it, because that would be terribly offensive, and you must respect other people's beliefs. And that's, as that's utter bullshit. Of course I shouldn't respect someone's beliefs, particularly if that belief means they don't respect me. It's just rubbish. But homeopathy, I think homeopathy is on the way out, I have to say. I think the death knell has already sounded, particularly with that Australian summary of, evidence. It's almost impossible for them, and so much pressure has been put on hospitals by people like people I work with, doctors I work with, myself included, to make sure that they're not offering this sort of crack stuff. They cannot justify it any longer. I think we will slowly see that fizzle out. So there's one good thing at least,
That's great. I mean, the studies are getting out there now. People are just sharing information in a way they've not been able to in the past, so that's a good thing. But I suppose I couldn't let you go without asking you a little bit about embarrassing bodies.
Yeah.
I'm pleased to hear that you use the designation Willie as well. It's my preferred.
Good. It's a good one.
Yeah.
And again, that's another thing that I used to get jumped on by my own colleagues. I was called disgracefully unprofessional. I was a disgrace to the medical profession, actually, for using terms like Willie on the telly. And I won't use. Obviously, you change your language according to your patients, and it's unbelievable, this response. But there we go. So I boldly go on telly and call her Willie or Willie, and I'm proud of it.
We need Christian for Willie as a hashtag trending at some point, I think. But I mean, I was going to ask: is it possible to even shock you anymore? Because I can imagine if someone walked into your surgery with about 4 heads, you'd kind of offer them a seat and tell them to take the hats off, and be fine. I mean, is the any oh my god moments for you anymore?
You know what? I get asked that so many times, and the boring answer is not really. But look, I made that I'm Gay documentary. I was shocked pretty much for the entire hour, and it took months to film. So yes, plenty shocks me. But I think disease doesn't shock me. It's what I sort of trained in. What does shock me actually quite often is what people know, or rather what people don't know. That's still in this day and age, really surprising. So, it's a very popular with young people. So we try and film lots with young people, with teenagers and things, and we do lots of box popping, going out chatting to kids in Ibiza and Magaluf and places like that. And my God, the stuff they come out with about sex and contraception and pregnancy and STIs. I mean, that shocks me. And I know that's a very boring answer for your podcast. I'm very aware of that, but it is the truth. And I think, okay, yes, some people might leave something festering away for 3 years, and it's a pretty horrible case, but that's not news to me. I know that happens. People are frightened. People can't access healthcare. The NHS is swamped. You can't get a GP appointment. People work. I know that. So that's not really a surprise. That's sort of endemic to the system. But it's kids, it's sort of 17-year-old girls who tell me, they never get pregnant because they douche with Coca-Cola after sex. That I go, you what? And at 17, and you think, yeah, that's quite shocking. I am officially shocked at that.
What I really love about Embarrassing Bodies, though, I suppose in the wrong hands, it has the potential to be kind of exploitative.
Yeah.
But the way it's handled, it's very professional. It's sincere, and watching it, you don't feel like you want to laugh at these people. You have sympathy for them. I mean, I think I was watching it the other night. That gentleman who came in called Mo.
Amazing. Yeah, with a 2-hour reconstruction.
Exactly. Yeah. I wanted him to be my new friend after watching that. So it kind of embeds a little bit of empathy into you, I think.
That's been so important to us, and all of the 3 doctors, Dawn, Pixie, myself. This was a big risk for us to take. I think people don't quite realise that people would do anything to be on telly, but telly can make you, or it can finish you. And I think a show like that, oh my God, people have used the word exploitative, voyeuristic, you name it. It's been fired at us. A freak show is the phrase that I find most offensive. I think that's a disgusting thing to say about people who are ill. People who are ill are not freaks, but that doesn't even need justifying to your listeners. But there's such a good team, such a sincere team behind it. It's partly down to patient choice. It's the way it's filmed, and I think I'm very careful. I can't answer for the other doctors, but I'm very keen that when something's funny, acknowledge that it's funny. If you're overly serious, it just looks ridiculous. So we make sure that we go out and we have a laugh and we make fake sick and giggle at it and look at poos. And when it's a willy or a bum, I talk about willies and bums and everyone giggles. And that's good because everyone does that in life. It's normal. And I think medicine gets so up itself sometimes. We're so sort of protective and defensive of this sort of magic circle that no one's allowed into, and we guard the secrets of life. I mean, it's such rubbish. We're human beings as well. I'm just as unhealthy as the next person, really, deep down. And I think just showing that human side to everybody makes people feel like they all belong. It's kind of like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Ode to Joy, that great brotherhood. It's kind of sometimes how I feel. But, we're all like this. We're all the same deep down. And that wonderful phrase that they keep saying in Embarrassing Bodies, there's no shame, we're all the same. It's so true. And I think that's really the secret of the show's success.
Fantastic. I think I've just got a couple of questions from Twitter before I let you get back to reading, if that's good for you.
I was seeing you were getting all sorts of things fired at you, weren't you, today?
Yeah, I've
welcome to my world.
I've had a great response from saying that you'll be on the podcast. I mean,
good.
My sister texted me yesterday, and she doesn't care less about what I do on the podcast, but she's suddenly interested now I've got you on, so...
Oh, how sweet.
You're doing something right. Keep doing what you're doing.
Good.
But Secular Blokes asked, do you think anti-vaxxers can be reasoned with, or is just persuading people sat on the fence the best we can hope for?
Yeah, I mean, are you going to persuade religious people to stop being religious in the face? I mean, I think we've already drawn that parallel between religion and complementary medicine, and the anti-vaxxer brigade is as rabidly evangelical as the most rabid evangelical is. I think you're never going to change that, but there are people who may listen to the anti-vaxxer, or they may listen to you. And so I think that idea that we have work to do. If we're gay and we want to show people what we're like, we have work to do. If you're a great believer in vaccination, then you have work to do to persuade people. So I do think it's very much up to us. Keep spreading the message, and I think you can expose. Don't know platform. Enter into debate. And that's why I love Twitter. I love Twitter because I throw out fairly controversial tweets. I know that, but I do it on purpose because I just want to get people talking about these things, people that have never really thought about these issues before. And, when you get a massive, great Twitter debate going on about vaccination, it's great. Everyone throws in a message, and some people who probably won't send any tweets at all will stand on the sidelines and watch. and they will make that up their mind according to what they're reading, and I think, as I said before, give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves.
Yeah, that's a great philosophy, isn't it? I mean, I think you're right. There is the odd casual observer who's perhaps not been exposed to some of these ideas, and just seeing you interact with somebody else might help, form their. I
often get asked, how do you put up with all this and all that crap that you get on Twitter and all these horrible things? But it's actually deep down, when people are saying all these vile things, they don't come across very well. And it's sort of those that are quietly standing on the sidelines and not joining in not joining the playground, because it is quite a brutal playground, Twitter, let's be honest, it really is. Those that are on the sidelines watching will naturally take a side and may learn something. Now, I sometimes go completely over the top, I agree with that, because it's very hard not to in the face of some of the rubbish that gets thrown around, but, I think, as I said, people will be quietly watching and learning and making up their own minds, and that's really important. That's all in informed choices, really, isn't it?
Exactly. One final question here I've got from somebody called Let's Go North, and I absolutely love this question. It's, do strangers come up to you and immediately ask you what's the best cure for piles? If so, what's his answer? And this is the best bit. It's accompanied by the hashtag asking for a friend.
That's a very popular one on Twitter. I mean, my God, I get asked that a lot, and I get asked everything. I mean, I have to say, the worst, God love them, are cab drivers, because they know you've got you trapped in the back. You can't get out, and they'll launch it. Well, I've got you here, Doc. And off you go with a long, complicated medical history that you then have to thoroughly analyse and critique and, come up with a care plan for them before they'll let you out of the cab, God bless them. But do they really want to know what the best cure for piles is? Well, I'll tell you what the old-fashioned cure for piles was. When I was a medical student, the old-fashioned cure was something called 3 fingers for 3 minutes. I leave that up to your imagination what that involved, but it was remarkably effective. We're not allowed to do it anymore, however.
I mean, I suppose it's bad enough just being a doctor in general, having people answer your questions, but a television doctor, you're screwed, aren't you, really?
Yeah, I am. I can't. On airplanes, I used to lie about what I do. I'm a solicitor or something, and that very quickly. I'm an accountant. It shut them up, and no questions.
No one wants
great.
To speak to an accountant.
Got some sleep, but people go, "Oh, you're that doctor off the telly," and you try to know. You are. Okay, I am. Can I just ask you? And I wrote a book. I'm not here to plug my book, by the way, but I did write a book called precisely that. It was called Can I Just Ask? Because that was the one thing that's the first phrase most people say when they see me. It's like, oh, it's you, can I just ask? It's like, of course you can, it's fine.
It's funny, isn't it, how the confidence isn't in there to walk into the doctors and get looked at, but they'll start a conversation with a perfect stranger if they know they're a doctor?
They are, of course. I am a perfect stranger and they're a perfect stranger, but that's the phenomenon of telly, that you're not, because you're in their living rooms for an hour once a week, and they really get to know you. And as you know, people who are real soap opera addicts, they know the characters inside out. They're real living characters. So, I mean, we've been on the telly now. I've been on the telly for, 8 years, 10 years, something like that. So people do really feel like they know you. So when you walk down the street, you get these really familiar, all right, how are you? And you've never seen them before in your life, and you sort of say, yeah, I'm good, how are you? I'm fine. And you walk away going, have I ever met that person before? Or is it one, just someone you recognise? It's very confusing, actually. It just means you have to be nice to everyone all the time, which is quite exhausting. But
I don't think, from an evolutionary standpoint, I'm not sure we're meant to be recognised all the time, are we? I can imagine it being a bit odd.
It's quite wearing, and because I'm 6'2" tall and look rather strange like I do, some unkind people say rather horse-like, I can't, I'm quite broad, I'm quite tall, I can't really blend into a crowd very well, and I've tried everything. I've tried the sunglasses, I've tried the baseball cap, none of them work, so I've just had to learn to accept it. A little bit like being gay, funnily enough.
Dr. Christian, I've really loved speaking to you. Is there anything else at all you wanted to say or get across before I let you get back to your evening?
Golly me, I just wish me luck on Newsnight tonight with Nicolesi, the father of reparative therapy, because he needs bringing down, I think.
Yeah, good luck. Is that going out live?
I think Newsnight is live, isn't it? I think. I ought to know that, really, having been about to go on it. But no, I think we've covered everything, really. I'm very happy. It's been really great talking to you. Thank you, actually, for taking an interest in this, because it really matters, so I love to be able to talk about it. Yeah,
it's great. Like I say, it's just perfect TV. It was the kind of thing I watched, and I kind of thought to myself, this is what telly should be. I wish there was more of this kind of thing. So keep doing what you do. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Really good to talk to you.
Thank you very much to my superb guest, Dr. Christian Jessen, and thank you very much for listening. I think we've all learned something here today.